Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Crossover Deep Dive. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by a fantastic composer, David Arkenstone. Hi, David.
Hi, Natasha. Thanks for having me.
It is such a privilege to have you. You have a fantastic new album, The Quest for the Runestone, and I'm looking forward to chatting about it with you.
Sure.
Can I ask you, before we get into the new album, for people who are exploring your music, obviously one of the things I love about it is that it's crossover. You have so many different influences. Can you share how your journey began as a composer and musician?
Gosh. Yeah, I was in junior high school and high school, and of course I had my favorite bands, and then I was in bands and we tried to sound just like our favorite bands. And then after that, I started realizing that I could sort of write songs, and I worked a lot
Mm.
with a friend of mine who was also in the band, and we wrote a lot of songs and fairly primitive at that point. But then by the time I got into college and stuff, I was getting a little more sophisticated, and then I went crisscross the country in the top 40 bands for quite a few years and played everybody else's music, and then decided I just wanted to do my own music. So I stopped that, and then I had a band, my own band, kind of a rock and roll band, but and our music was like somewhere between Styx and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. We had a lot of vocals, but had a lot of classical influences,
Mm.
and I played as many keyboards as I could purchase, I think, at the time. And then the band kind of just, I don't know, it kind of didn't get anywhere, and so I decided to go solo. And then after I went solo, then I started to explore a little bit more of my own instrumental music, and then somehow I got a record deal. And I was lucky, and people liked my first album, so I've been doing it ever since then.
Yeah, you've had a fantastic career, numerous Grammy nominations, and a billion streams, which I feel like is just hard to comprehend. Um, but can you
Yeah.
tell us now? Something I've heard as I've been researching you is that when you create a project, you kind of have a sound palette that you do for that. So for this new album here, what were some of the sounds that you weren't going to work with, or maybe some that you wanted to incorporate?
Well, yeah, I do. That's one way for me to try to get my head around whatever I'm thinking of doing. And I mean, on this album, it's got folk influences from northern Scandinavia. It's got
Mm.
Celtic influences, and then it's got sort of cinematic influences. So I knew it was going to kind of be orchestral with a Scandinavian bent to it. So I knew there wouldn't be any saxophone or a lot of other things like that.
Right.
That family wasn't going to belong in that palette. I used a lot of stringed instruments and drums. I concentrated on that a lot more. And we had hurdy-gurdy on there. We had the Hardinger fiddle, which is a fiddle from Norway, which has sympathetic strings on it. So when the player plays their notes, the other strings vibrate, and it creates this really cool kind of sound. And then we had the uilleann pipes from Ireland.
Beautiful
Eric
instrument.
Rigler played those, and so the whole album had a sort of northern feel, I think.
And can you tell me, you mentioned your collaborators. Something I've heard you say in the past
Yeah.
is that uh, obviously you create this music and then you give it to people and they just bring their own influences, and it's amazing to hear. So what were some of the things that were surprises and beautiful surprises for you working with Eric and then also, I believe, Luann on
Yeah.
this album?
Well, when you have, you can sort of see my keyboard over here. That keyboard
Yes.
is linked to a computer with pretty much every sound known to man. And so, I have a lot of libraries with sounds, and some of them are incredible and are more are closer to an orchestra than I ever thought I'd be able to do in my own studio. And even though I go record many times with orchestras and small string groups and things like that, I can get pretty close before that. So my demos are pretty, when I'm going to give a demo to somebody, like let's take Eric, for example. I have an uilleann pipe sample, but it's really sketchy. You know, it's good enough to get it's good enough to get an idea of what it's going to sound, and I can put it in the key that I know Eric can play in, because that's a limitation of the pipes, is certain keys. And so I try to do what I know. You know, I've worked with him since 1998, so I kind of know what's going to be okay for him. But then he gets it and listens to it, and then, you know, turns the guide track off and just puts, I can only call it soul, really. He puts his soul into it, into the part, and into the way he plays his instrument, and you cannot get that from a keyboard. Just doesn't happen on that instrument. Or the violin. The same with Luann. I'll write a part out. She'll see the notes, and it's like, okay, it's like a starting point. And then off she goes, and she puts her soul into it. Same with the vocalist, Clara. You know, you can tell them what you'd like, and then they elevate it somehow into something that's more than you even kind of dreamed it was possible. I think I'm always blown away by their talents, which is, I guess, why I keep calling them. But it's just an amazing thing. They get the notes in their hand, and they're so good at their instruments that they just bring it alive.
I love what you're saying about the soul. I feel like, especially now, as we keep hearing about AI music coming in, that's one thing it just can't replicate, right? That soul is never gonna.
Yeah, that won't happen. I don't think that'll ever happen, because it's especially, well, with AI it might be different, but with samples, the computer doesn't know necessarily what the next note is going to be. Like, it doesn't think in phrases like a musician. It sees a note, and then it quickly calculates the next note, and I mean, super quickly, ridiculously quickly. So it knows there's another note soon, but it doesn't think in phrase. It doesn't think. So it doesn't think in phrases. Like a musician will see 6, 8 notes together and know that's a phrase, and then they can really work with that. So that's a difference that I don't think AI is going to be able to replicate really anytime soon, if ever.
I agree with you there. Can you tell us a little bit about the story of the quest for the Runestone? Because I think it started out musically, but then you have this fabulous booklet that I was able to see a preview of, and there's a story too.
I had an idea for the album. Yeah, here's the booklet.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's quite big, right? Like 48 pages.
It's 48 pages long, yeah. And I had an idea for the album, and then I thought, I've done sort of concept albums before in my career, and they all have stories. The first one was In the Wake of the Wind, which was 1992, 91, I mean, I think. And it had a little story, and it didn't have a booklet, but it kind of, the booklet had the story in it, and that was a start of my love of doing conceptual records, where I'm sort of doing a soundtrack to a film in my head, or whatever story we've come up with. And so as I just tinkered around with some sounds, and I kind of knew what kind of music I wanted to do. But then I asked my son, who's a writer, if he wanted to, and he likes fantasy too, if he would write a story. And he just came up with a story that was unreal to me. Like, I didn't expect it to be so rich, I guess. I mean, I figured it would be good, but it just became rich. And then I looked at the story, and I found places that I could use for titles. There were characters in it, so it just became my blueprint for following this story. And I knew I wanted to have a a beginning. Like, I wrote the song Prophecy, most of that before I had seen the whole book, or the whole story. And so I had that, but I had very little else. And then once he told me what the story was going to be about, then I started writing and sketching more things. And then when I got the story, it was like, oh my goodness, this is going to be incredible. And it ended up being incredible. I was really happy with it, and really proud of him. It was really great. He did a great job. And I kept pestering him because we had deadlines, right? It was like I hated to do that, but you know, you have to. If you don't set a deadline, I would still be working on this album, I think.
What a wonderful way to collaborate. And this album is so
Yeah,
beautiful. I think
yeah.
I'm late to fantasy. I only watched
Oh,
Lord of the Rings, I think last year. Love it
that's all
now.
right. That's all right.
But I think the incredible thing is when you're seeing those films, obviously there's so much going on visually, but an album like yours, I find that it takes me, like I could hear the smoke, I could hear all these different things happening as I'm sitting and listening
Nice.
without any of that screen that's happening. It's all just by listening.
Right. Yeah, I have said, and I continue to say, when I start to write a piece of music, I have to have some kind of visual thing going on my hand. I don't just
Mm.
try to put some notes together. I mean, sometimes I'll sit down and just try to write a nice, beautiful melody, but I still images creep in there, and images of earlier melodies, either I've done or somebody else has done. I don't mean I rip them off. I just mean like how should a melody go? Like for example, the song Rianne, which is after I got the story from Dash, I realized that our protagonist needed her own song.
Mhm.
So I sat down to write the song, and I sat at the piano, and I wrote something, and I thought it was incredibly beautiful, but then I thought maybe I ripped it off. So I asked everybody I knew if they had ever heard it, and they said no. So I was very happy because there's really only 12 notes to play with, you know, on the in the scale. So it's tricky to come up with something new that either you haven't done before or nobody's heard before. And that was one of the moments that I thought I nailed that one. And then when Eric and Luann played, it was like, oh my gosh, so it was so nice.
Amazing. Yeah, it must be so difficult because when you think of someone like Bach, who he was writing new music every week for church, right?
Yep.
He had to
Yep.
ever use something. I know Andrew Lloyd Webber, there's been one song, it's kind of been in a few musicals till it found its home. So
Yeah,
coming up with new things, it must really help to have that story to inspire.
it is. And even Hans Zimmer, you can see there's certain kind of things he likes,
Yeah.
certain styles. He doesn't necessarily copy himself, but you know, there's parts in Gladiator that also are represented in Pirates of the Caribbean, and
Mhm.
not so much Dune. I think he broke the mold open with Dune. Uh, but there's certain things you get comfortable with as a composer, and you know, it's hard to get outside that sometimes. But because I had the story, I knew the kind of song I wanted to write already, several of them. You know, I knew I wanted to have a sort of a big couple songs at the end, you know, one sort of a wrap up song, and saying how Rianne had gone through this journey, and there she is, you know, she's a more, uh, she's got, there's more to her character than when she started in the story. And then before that song, which is that song is called Keeper of the Flame. Before that song is Secrets of the Runestone, where she discovers some things. And I knew that was going to be a big kind of culmination sort of song. So at least I had, because I had the story and I had an idea of what I wanted to do, it was really like writing a soundtrack. And I that's the way I
Mhm.
prefer to write most of the time, instead of like, oh, I'm going to sit down and see if I can write a song today, which I do also, because sometimes I don't have a clear concept, but this one was pretty clear from the get-go. So I was happy about that.
And I think as you were mentioning, the things that composers love in their music, there's just a few elements that make it you, right? But then something that you always say, and I think other greats always say, is that they continue to explore always, whether it's new techniques or adding new sounds. So what were some of the new things that you were excited to bring to this quest for the runestone?
Well, you know, like I've never written anything for the hurdy-gurdy instrument, which is
Okay.
a medieval kind of instrument with a crank. It basically has a wheel that vibrates violin strings, viola strings, whatever they are. I've never done anything for that instrument. And I had to look into, because I knew I wanted the sound, so I had to look into how somebody could play that. And I found an incredible player to do that through another friend of mine, and I was lucky there too. because he also added things that were not on the sheet music, which I love. Uh, so that was one thing, and then I had some vocal stuff I wanted in there, because part of the story has to do with singing, and so I found a singer, Clara Sarace, and she just brought some amazing. I don't hardly ever. That's a bad sentence, but I hardly ever uh, use vocals. I've done it
Mhm.
sporadically throughout my albums, but usually it's choirs or something like that. And this time it was soloistic and small groups, and she just did some amazing vocals that fit the album just perfectly. And so
Yeah.
I had to think about writing for that, um, which I don't normally do, but it's fun to push yourself, and a lot of times I'll use a different instrument if I'm starting to write a song like for this. A lot of it starts with keyboards because it's a gateway into a world of sound.
Mhm.
But sometimes I'd rather come up with a beat, or I got every drum I owned out of storage and put it in the studio for this album. And there's a lot of drums on it because I just love drums, I guess. But then sometimes I'll start with my guitar, and if you, depending on what you write on, things can change. Like on the guitar, it's really easy to skip around. In a melody, you can jump around easier than you can on the keyboard. Like the keyboard's sort of linear in a way. Guitar is more, you can jump around when you're playing. It's easy to go down a string or whatever, which makes it great for string parts, violin string parts, and things like that. So depending on what I use to write the song or start the song, then it'll end up being a sort of a different kind of exploration, and wow, it never ends, really, luckily.
And you've done some innovative things in the past. I don't remember the name of the album, but you had it to where it was meant to be played on two record players where they're
Yeah.
going at the same time, which really creates an experience, right? And I think now, unfortunately, we've transitioned to this mode where it's streaming and people aren't necessarily going to sit down and hear a whole song. So
No.
what is for you as a composer? Have you adjusted anything, to your approach or
Well, I think, we're talking about Quest for the Runestone now. I think that's
yeah.
an adjustment because now, at this point in time, most people consume music a track at a time. Maybe not necessarily my fans, but most people. You'll get on Spotify or Apple Music, and there's a playlist, and so you hear a track from maybe 20 different composers in that playlist, and you like that playlist because it's a certain kind of music. And so the computer, the probably AI, and other curators, they put a bunch of music together that's similar in mood, I would say. Like, you don't hear stuff that's super different. You don't hear a hard metal track with like a dark ambient track or then a Beatles song. um, it's more curated, and people love taking mood journeys now. uh, and sometimes it doesn't matter, like the particular artist doesn't matter so much. And so uh, I'm on the fence whether I like that or not. I mean, I still get exposed to new music because I do listen to playlists once in a while,
Yep.
especially if I'm not in the studio or I'm in the car. I'll hear something on a playlist that I just outlined, and I'll think, oh, that's pretty cool. And but on this album, I was trying to go back to the time when people would listen to an entire album at the
Mhm.
same time without jumping around, which harkens back to LPs, really. When you put an LP on, it's very tactile. You have to participate in some manner, whether you put the needle on or the machine puts the needle on, that thing runs the whole album side, even if you're washing dishes or something. But sometimes you're on a couch looking at the big artwork that they used to have, um, or reading lyrics or whatever, but it was more of a participatory experience. And I think I think that's why vinyl is coming back in a big way, because people, a lot of people, especially younger people, have never experienced that. They grew up with streaming. Even my kids who are a little older than that, uh, they grew up with CDs pretty much. Napster, just heard certain pieces of an artist's repertoire, and so I wanted this to be sit down and listen to the whole thing if you can. And that's a long-winded explanation, but that's what I was going for, and that's why, because it has a story. The songs make sense even if you're not reading the story, or even if you don't know the story, but the music is connected. And so I think it's a more rich experience if you do have the opportunity to listen to the album at one time, and you get more of what I was trying to illustrate. And I guess that's it.
I think, yeah, there's definitely something different in the experience of it, and having that story, like you mentioned, is fantastic. I think it's also packaged very beautifully from what I've seen.
Mm.
Um, can you tell me now? So is it 70 albums that you've done at this point, or been featured
Can't
on?
even, I cannot even relate to that. I mean,
It's a lot.
it's a lot, something like that. Yeah. I mean, a guy at a show one time, he came up, one of the fans came up and he was showing me something on his phone and said I had 800 songs.
Wow.
I was like, wow, that's a lot of songs. If you count all these albums and then the albums that I've collaborated on and stuff I did when I had my own label, um, it's a lot. But it's all I do. I mean, it's not all I do, but it's what I mostly do, and it's what I mostly love to do. And almost any time, I'd rather be doing that. There might be a few exceptions, but I love exploring music. I love exploring what I might come up with using technology or not using technology. I have a modular um, sound system here, computer system with a lot of modules, and you just start twisting knobs, and you never know what you're going to find with that. And so that's really fascinating. I mean, I saw the Moog synthesizer, I think, in the early 70s in a music store, and that really changed the face of a lot of things. And now there's one behind me, can't see it, but I have a whole collection of things that are just made for experimentation. And you don't get great things every time you sit down, but most of the time you hear something that you've never heard before, and that's super exciting. And even putting music together and putting this album together and this package, I've never done a package like that, with a booklet and all these other kind of trinket things that you get, these special keepsakes that come in the box. I've never done that before, so the whole thing was a big exploration and an experiment, and people loved it, which I'm fortunate enough to say.
I think it's just amazing how it's advanced, because I remember I'm a 90s baby, so I remember hearing pretty tinny MIDI instruments. And when you hear from that, the way it's opened the door for so much music, but now there's such a volume of music coming at you. So I don't know, what would you say to a young musician trying to break through some of that noise and be true to themselves? I don't know.
I think what you just said, you got to be true to yourself, and I am happy I'm not just starting out. I mean, and I don't want to be negative about that, but when you think about Spotify loading 50 or 60,000 songs per day,
Oof, yeah.
know, how does the consumer wade through that to find what they would like? Or, in the early days, you had record companies that were sort of the gatekeepers of music getting into the public consciousness. I mean, you had some maverick companies But then you had, which was, I think it was good in a way because there was like a sort of a filter. And I don't say that because somebody let me have a record deal. I think just in hearing stuff, because there's, with all those 60,000 tracks, you know, that's a lot of stuff, and anybody can upload now. So how do you know if it's going to be good or not? You don't have time to listen to all that. So it's very tricky. But I would say to a young musician, you just got to try to come up with something that's uniquely yours, I think. And you have to be, I think passion doesn't even come close to describing what you have to be to do it, because first of all, you need perseverance for sure. And you need to know, I think you need to know music in some way, because right now there's a lot of ways to make music and you don't have to be a musician. And that's fine. I think a lot of kids are experimenting when they're 12, 13, 14 years old, coming up with amazing things. But I think for that longevity, I think uh, you need to study some music, at least get familiar with how music is structured. Even if you want to break a mold, it's nice to know where it's started in a way. But I would say just be passionate and make, like you said, be true to yourself. Don't don't try to emulate somebody, because by the time you do that, it'll be too late. Uh, that thing will have maybe passed. Uh, but that's a good, if you're just very starting out, it's good. I did that. I learned to play Beatles songs. I learned to play stuff I liked, just to hear how it was constructed. I learned a bunch of organ solos because it was fun, and I wanted to know how to do that. I remember, and I don't know. It's a challenging time, but it's a challenging time for people that are already in the music business and have been, with streaming and all that. It's not the same as it's is selling thousands and thousands of CDs. It's a different world. Uh, but if you're hooked, you're hooked. What can you do?
I love that concept, kind of being a student of the craft, and then you can break the mold. That's fantastic. So I
Yeah,
think your music, it's been the soundtrack of so many people's lives. So thank you for sharing it, first of all. And
sure.
also, can you just tell us what's next for you? Because obviously you have Quest for the Runestone. Are you working on anything in your beautiful home studio now, or what's coming next?
Uh, I'm still writing the Runestone album because I'm still doing interviews and we're still talking about it, and it just came out like a month ago today.
Yeah.
So it's still making some noise and
Will you
and
take it
getting
on
out
tour?
there into people's lives. We're doing a tour starting in Colorado on December 1st, and
Okay.
I'm going to try to play one or two songs from it because it's kind of more of a holiday tour, but
Hmm.
I play a lot of stuff that isn't necessarily holiday music in it. It's not all back-to-back Christmas carols or anything. It's a varied show. Let's put it that way. So I think I could fit one or two songs in there, and it will be challenging to play those live. you know. So that's what's next, and then I'm going to take a vacation to Portugal. So
Nice.
that's probably going to be inspirational too.
Yeah, you need some time to replenish those creative juices. You
Yeah.
can't just always put out. Exactly.
No, and travel is always inspirational for me. And even when I can't travel, I travel through my music. I mean,
Mm.
like this story, the Runestone story, it was like easily to visualize myself in a snowy mountain range or going through these trials and tribulations. And so I travel. I'm an armchair music traveler for sure. And I've done a lot of albums that bear that out. So but hopefully I'll get some inspiration, and I always do from traveling, seeing other cultures, other musics. It's just
And then
wonderful.
nature. I know nature has been a
Yeah,
big inspiration
yeah,
for you too.
yeah. It's lovely to see. I mean, I go to Yosemite all the time, and I've seen it a lot. So it's nice to go to other places that have uh, their own special character.
Hmm.
That's always fun, and the people. It's always nice too.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a treat chatting with you, David, and I hope that you have a lot of success with this album. It's absolutely incredible.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I think some of my best stuff. I mean, I probably think that after every album, but this one's different in a way because I had so many people help me with it, recording it, bringing their artistry to it, the book, working with my son. It's super special. So it's really cool. But thanks for saying that.
Thank you so much, and we hope to see our listeners next time.
Great. Thanks for listening.